Okay, so when we have our imaginary numbers, we call that a complex number. Okay. So a complex number is any number that can be written in the format of a plus bi. So a and b are real numbers, and I is the imaginary unit. So a we call the real part, so this is the real part. And then bi, the b and the I together, are the imaginary part. Okay. So when you first started looking at your numbers, you had natural numbers. So like it were often called your counting numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. And then you have your whole numbers. And your whole numbers included 0. And then you had your integers. So that would be like -3, -2, -1, so on and so forth. 1, 2, 3, I should say. Oh, dear heavens. And going off in both directions, okay? A rational number includes your integers, your whole numbers, and your natural numbers, but it also has fractions, and it can be your integers that have, or your integers as well, I should say. Then you have your irrational numbers. So your irrational numbers, I suppose we should put ends, a fraction, not fraction, that ends, a decimal that ends, or a repeating decimal. Okay. And then the irrational are decimals that go on for forever. And then all of those numbers we call real numbers. All of those are encompassed in real numbers. Okay, and then we have something called complex numbers. So your complex numbers include your real and your imaginary numbers. So it's encompassing all of those. So your imaginary numbers have that as well. So it says blank real numbers are complex numbers. So some real numbers are complex numbers. Right? So if I had something like 3 plus 0i, that would be a real number because we have just none of the imaginary part. Okay? And we have imaginary numbers are complex numbers. So all of our imaginary numbers are complex numbers. Okay? And then blank imaginary numbers are real numbers. So no imaginary numbers are real numbers. Okay. So then we want to look and see which one these numbers belong to. So if we look at 2/5, 2/5 is a fraction, so that means that it's rational. Okay. It's also a real number. Okay, so notice if we've got a rational number, that it's also a real number, which also means that it's a complex number. Okay. If we have I root 7, okay, that means that we have the imaginary number, which is also part of your complex numbers. So if we look back up here, our imaginaries are part of our complex. Okay. So then we have pi minus root 2i. So we've got that I, which means that it's going to be imaginary. So this part's irrational. The root 2 is irrational, but the I makes it so that it's imaginary. So we have, this is an imaginary number, okay, which means if it's imaginary, it's also complex. Okay. So here we've got a fraction and then a fraction times by I. So because we have the I, we know that this is our complex and imaginary number. So that is how our imaginary numbers fit into where we've looked at our numbers before in our numbering system.